Welcome to Bell Midnight. On this episode, we'll be discussing, did the communist regime have a secret fetish for interspecies relations? Find out that and more coming up.
I don't know what you've heard about this particular story before, but there was reports that during the early 20th century, the Communist Party of Russia, uh, shortly after the Bolshevik Revolution, was interested in various alterations to the population. Um,
Alterations.
Yes, alterations. As in, you have a man out there working a field and you're farming. I mean, not many because most of them are gone now.
Oh, well, yeah, you killed all
Yeah,
the landowners.
you've killed them all off. So the difficult thing, um, well, we'll get into that later. The important thing, I looked into this particular subject because it was kind of interesting. It's come up a couple of times. Historically, it's come up a couple of times, and some notable authors, some from Scientific American, and others like that, have made note of a very peculiar gentleman in history. His name is, and I'm going to try to pronounce this. If I screw it up, I don't really care. Uh, Ilya Ivanov, specifically full name one, Ilya Ivanovich Ivanov. He was born on August 1st, 1870, in
Okay.
Shigiri, Kursk, Gurbania, Russia. This is on the eastern side of Russia. It's just closer to Europe.
Oh, so you
He lit
mean the western side by Europe.
or western side, excuse me.
All right.
Well, yeah, and he died on the 20th of March, 1932. He was 61. We'll talk about the various circumstances surrounding his death.
So you're saying he died in a mysterious fashion in communist Russia?
No, no, there wasn't. There was no mysterious fashion of the death. His death was pretty much a foregone conclusion due to some relocation and um,
Oh, I see.
repurposing of a once brilliant man.
Mm.
Um, so anyway, this gentleman, he was born in Russia, and he graduated from Kharkov University in 1896. He became a professor in 1907.
Mm.
He pretty much started his career working as a researcher for the Askania Nova Natural Reserve. And he was also later on worked for the State Experimental Veterinary Institute. That was from 1970 to 1921. From 1924 to 1930, for the Central Experimental Station for Researching Reproduction of Domestic Animals. That's the key one.
Okay.
A little backstory. Um, Basically, this gentleman, well, let me start off with where we're going to go with this eventually.
It's
So
Eggman.
it's ape men. It's ape men and ape men fishes.
Ugh.
But for great apes, all great apes have a similar genetic structure. Not to be too technical, I'm going to go through this because and everyone who's listening to this is going to immediately forget because it's just a bunch of numbers. The chromosomes 6, 13, 19, 21, 22, and X are structurally the same in all great apes.
Mm.
Chromosomes 3, 11, 14, 15, 18, and 20 match between gorillas, chimpanzees, and humans. Chimps and humans match on 1, 2p, 2q, 5, 7 through 10, 12, 16, and Y as well, which is
Wow.
quite a bit. Well,
Wow,
I think
yeah.
it's something along the lines of 98% genetic similarity there.
That's what we're generally told, that we're 98% or something along those
Yeah.
lines genetically similar.
The common misconception, though, with great apes is that they're close to us in an evolutionary path. Technically, they're not. If you think of evolution as a branching tree, where they are technically isn't close to us because they bear some genetic similarities. They couldn't be any further away from us, but there are indeed a lot of similarities because structurally we come from very similar chains, but you'd have to go back.
Right,
But
right.
like the
Because
trees to a branch, the branches on the right side are not very close to the branches on the left side, essentially.
right, because along the tree, I mean, they're technically, they're a different species.
Yeah,
So it's not like they're a different version of humans. They're a different species.
yeah, and technically, at least from what I've heard, I'm obviously no genetic scientist, but from what I've heard, it's not even as close as where you get something like donkeys and horses, things like that. Although a lot of that is from selective breeding.
Right.
But anyway, bearing that information, This gentleman. So, the beginning of his work in 1901, he founded the world's first center for artificially impregnating horses in Dolga village, Orlovskaya Gubernania, or something close to that.
It's
Whatever.
Russian.
Yeah, it's Russian. You know, Das Vidanya. He proceeded to experiment with interspecies hybridization.
Oh god.
His, yeah, I know, right? Uh, his his specialty is horses. He was crossbreeding domestic animals with the wild varieties of them via artificial insemination. Ultimately, the purpose of these experiments was, and this is very specifically stated, to breed animals with a higher resistance to disease and achieve more favorable traits. You want to see wild animals, in a lot of cases, in comparison to their domestic counterparts, are much more robust, simply by nature of being wild animals, of course. Their exposure to particular things is, usually, basically, their thresholds for stamina, disease resistance, and things like that. And if I had to boil it down to something I can understand, not being a scientist, they're not baby, essentially.
Right.
They're closer to the the mold or the gold standard.
Right.
Um,
And what they were doing wasn't terribly unusual either. I mean, humans
no.
have been trying to genetically engineer animals, domestication of dogs,
Oh, yeah,
and
dogs are the big one. I mean, you
and
go back a long time, that
and
happened a lot with
even
dogs.
genetically manipulating how plants grow and how the fruits are produced. So it's not
Yeah.
uncommon that they strayed into this territory because man's been doing it for thousands of years.
Not even to go off on a tangent here, but if you ever take a look at what a naturally occurring strawberry looks like in the wild, I'm not sure how many even exist to this day. Completely different than what one looks like now, and tomatoes as well. They're
Oh yeah.
entirely different looking plant.
Oh yeah. I heard
Um,
bananas used to be almost all seeds at one time.
yeah, that's the way most of that stuff was. Humans have had a really big impact, and that kind of knowledge on how to, you know, interbreed the plants and things like that is produced higher yield crops and things of that nature.
Right.
He produced a hybrid of a domestic horse. He crossbred a zebra and what is specifically referred to as Przewalski's horse. It's a Equus cabilis Przewalski. It's the only true wild horse that's actually still in existence.
Wow.
Uh, yeah, so he crossbred those two and he made this wild horse. Now, this started to get him a lot of attention. He perfected a way where he could inseminate 500 mares with just the semen of one stallion. Um, and at this point, you have all the horse breeders like Saudi Arabia has a long history. Well, not Saudi Arabia specifically, but the Middle East has a long history of the horse racing. Various other parts of the world, the quality of the horse, the quickness of your horse. It's good for the racing. It's good for the stock. It's good for there's tons of uses for it, and especially when you're talking about the beginning of the 20th century, nobody's riding around in automobiles. The faster, stronger, more resilient, and resistant to disease of horses, all the better.
Oh,
It
absolutely.
improves your military capability and improves, just domestic travel, everything. And with having a lower occurrence of disease and various other afflictions, you basically get more bang for your buck. I'm going to go off on a tangent here. Um, Fast forward to modern time before we continue with the story.
Okay.
There's been a lot of rumors about close relatives to humans and apes. There was an ape named Oliver. His lifespan went from at least the known 1957 to the 2nd of June 2012. He was
Wow.
a yeah, they're pretty long lived actually. They have very human lifespan. He was a performing ape, and for a while he was promoted as a missing link. And he was specifically called a Humanzee.
Is this the
Uh,
one that kind of looked like a person in a way?
yeah, he looked very similar to a person due to his human appearance, and he had a tendency to walk upright. Uh,
Yeah, this is him. He would walk around on his feet and stuff.
yeah. Now, scientists originally found that Oliver was not a human chimpanzee hybrid. He was actually within the range of variants that you can get with a chimpanzee. There was nothing especially unique about him. But it's always been something that's been in like the zeitgeist, the human zeitgeist about for the as long as these primates have been known, the similarities to human have always been apparent. Catches a lot of people's attention, especially when they start talking upright, especially when the features are a little less chimpanzee and a little more human looking. Also caught Ivanov's attention. Anyway, we'll get back to Oliver in a second. So Ivanov here, he fell into correspondence with the government, and they had seen what he had been doing with horses. Now, the information on this is somewhat limited, but apparently at some point he gets hooked up with, after the Bolshevik Revolution, he gets hooked up with the Communist Party. I'm sorry, the People's Party, whatever the heck they call themselves, whatever they're masquerading as. And he starts working in their laboratories. So as early as 1910, he had given a presentation to the World Congress of Zoologists in Graz, which is in Austria, in which he described the possibility of obtaining a hybrid for artificial insemination, the process that he had previously perfected with horses. Once he had garnered the attention of the party, this is around the time he started working for the State Experimental Veterinary Institute, excuse me. He had actually, they had started, let's call it recruiting. He began recruiting Soviet women who were willing to do their half for science.
Their half.
5 women, yeah, their half. 5 women or more volunteer for the experiment. Basically, they were going to give their eggs. He inseminated the eggs. Now, the insemination part actually went off without a hitch because the sperm were able to penetrate the egg and fertilize. However, the story is, and take it for a grain of salt, it's probably true because there's all kinds of difficulties that you encounter when you're trying to do this. Interspecies does not really. None of them were able to be brought to term.
Right. Yeah, I heard there was a lot of problems with it. Like either they wouldn't be fertilized or they would be like stillborn or whatever,
correct.
right?
Yeah, nothing was ever brought to term. He had a plan for trying to inseminate women in Africa without consent, and the
Oh.
Soviet Academy of Sciences stepped in and took away his support for that project because, and I quote, they said it might undermine the trust of Africans in European researchers and doctors and make problematic any future or further expeditions of Russian scientists in Africa. Essentially, what happened at that point is he carried on his research in Russia. And what's interesting about him, this kind of heads off into another direction too. You may wonder to yourself, how is this guy getting the support of the government when
Well, I mean, this guy's he's kind of famous. He's kind of world renowned. I mean, did this guy win any like Nobel prizes? Was he ever like nominated for anything like big scientific awards at all?
No, well, you got to remember the time too. We're talking about the early 20th century.
Okay.
That stuff is less well known, and also think about where he's doing his work.
Yeah, that's
I
true.
mean, like it's not, Russia even before when it was, when it was the SARS, basically was still pretty insulated. There wasn't a lot of, international stuff going on. So
Well, everyone knew about Rasputin.
that's true. Everyone knew about, but
Everyone knew about
he,
the great con man with the magic
Rasputin,
penis.
lover of the Russian queen,
Yeah.
Rasputin.
They cut his penis off and put it in a jar.
Does it give you special powers if you open the jar and give it a sniff?
I'm
Can you
sure
get, like,
there's someone out there that believes it's magic.
you can levitate and turn invisible. Now all I gotta do to pull off that bank heist is get a hold of Rasputin's penis. It's a foolproof plan.
I know. I think it was recently found, and I guess the granddaughter of Rasputin filed a lawsuit to get it back or something because it was in a museum somewhere. Yeah, it's in a museum of oddities or something. The macabre museum of I forget what it's called.
Was it preserved? What, they pickle it? Like,
Yeah, it's pickled in a fucking jar.
it's sitting in some borscht. Oh God. Speaking of which, have you ever had borscht? It's like some of the worst stuff in the world, except for like there's one person I know that made it tolerable. Tolerable is the absolute height of what that can be.
Gets you through the
But
cold winters in Siberia, comrade.
yeah, right. Okay, so amidst all this, you're thinking this guy's got this communist government propping him up, and you're gonna wonder who it was. Now, this is during Lenin's time, for the most part. A lot of his really heavy research happened after Lenin, because remember, in the 20s, Lenin suffered a stroke. And then there was the standard communist shakeup where everybody starts fighting each other, everybody starts killing each other, people go into exile, people go end up missing. The standard communist fare where you just start killing everybody to see who
Right,
comes out on top.
right. The big
Uh,
power struggle.
yeah. In all of this was a gentleman called Nikolai Petrovich Gorbunov. Now, Nikolai served under Vladimir Lenin, Alexei Rakov, and Vyacheslav Molotov. I do not know if that Molotov cocktail is named after that man. However, I am fascinated by the idea that it might be.
Oh yeah.
It would be very appropriate. But
Mm.
he was the secretary of the Council of People's Commissars of the USSR. Now, this is after Lenin had his glorious revolution, and they shot Tsar Nicholas II and his family, specifically when they hunted down the children like animals and brutalized them because they were such great warriors for the people.
Yeah, real
Um,
brave.
yeah, the Bolsheviks are a special kind of person, really the kind of people that all these modern folks aspire to. I mean, excellent choice. But this fella was basically, he was the CEO of the Russian Academy. He was the biggest supporter of his work. He seemed to be kind of a fair weather kind of guy. Like he's all about Lenin, and then he's all about the next guy. And he basically goes where the wind blows him. Seems like he doesn't really have a lot of standards, and he's very mission oriented. So
Okay.
there was the big debate about this research in which he's trying to implant, he's trying to achieve artificial insemination on, between chimpanzees and humans is what is the purpose for it. Now, if you read Scientific American, and I just did a couple nights ago, they make a very clear and concise point that there's no way possibly that this was had any intention to be anything sinister and they were just doing research,
It's
which
just
is
accident. Just
quite
accident,
frankly,
comrade.
and I'll call them right out directly to their faces. They're full of shit because the Soviet government never did anything for the good of the people or just for research. Either had something to do with war, of their own benefit, or enslaving their own people. Period. There are no other motivations for the Soviet government. If they have motivations to improve the lives of the people, they would have more farms and less factories to build those worthless tanks they built in the Second World War. That's what they would have done. But they
Oh,
didn't do that.
but we
Instead,
debunked that. We debunked that on our little blog.
it's like we got 90% of our, what was it, T-34s are dead in a month from problems out there. Practically fashioned via farm equipment. And our people are standing on food line. We got factories for miles all around our block housing, but no one can have anything to eat. That's the Soviet government. And you want me to believe, and Scientific American wants me to believe, that there's nothing sinister about their intentions of this confirmed case of them trying to achieve artificial insemination between a chimpanzee and a human. That's bullshit, and they should be ashamed of themselves. And that's from me to them on the record.
There
They're
you
full of
go.
shit. So,
On the record, they're full of shit.
ju- basic, basic, yeah, on the record. And then call me out on that. But quite frankly, it fails even the most basic logical thinking. But anyway, this gentleman was the one who was propping up our dear scientist. He ran into some problems of his own. Now, as you recall, after Lenin suffered a stroke, I believe that was in 1926, things started to go downhill quick. Then the power struggles began. Now, when the power struggles began, Stalin starts trying to seize control. There's his feuds with Trotsky. There's exile. Trotsky was exiled to Turkey. Then he disappeared. Uh, no, he disappeared in Mexico. He was exiled to Turkey, and then Trotsky disappeared in Mexico.
Wow, they do a
Um,
lot of good disappearing.
they do a lot of good disappearing, and they're really good at it at long distance. I gotta
Yeah.
say, those crazy Soviets, they really know how to go incognito and disappear forever, huh?
Mm,
Somebody ought to ask Yuri Bezmenov about that. But
a necessary trait.
oh, it's a very necessary trait for a communist regime. So essentially, this is when things start to go wrong. Ivanov ran into some problems. because he was serving in his role, or this gentleman was serving in his role at Administrator Affairs of the Council of People's Commissars in 1930. After the dental lens, it came up to 1937. He was the CEO of Russian Academy of Sciences, and then there was the Great Purge. This is Stalin's, I'm taking the reins and I'm clearing everybody out.
Yeah,
He
this is
was
where
indicted.
he took care of all the high-ranking guys that may not have been loyalists to him.
Yeah, and of course, the charge that he faced was the same as the charge for anybody. He was indicted for espionage, sentenced to death, and executed at night. Now, prior to that,
And
they
then
had started
doctored out of all the photographs.
well, that was actually that was actually what happened, and then he was rehabilitated, which in the Soviet system means that they acknowledged that he now existed, and that maybe we were a bit hasty, and that just took about a good 20. Well, it was in 1954.
Wow.
He was executed in 1938, so a little less than 20 years. So hey, grats to them for getting around to it. Sounds like a utopia over there. Thanks, Marks. Anyway, so in the process of him, this infighting that's going on, he starts to lose his influence, loses power. And his man, Ivanov, starts to lose his influence. Now, what happens to Ivanov? He's in the middle of his research, and I don't think that he was necessarily successful. He might have gotten close, but I don't think the technology at the time would have allowed him to be successful. And plus, he's in a communist system, and if there's one thing they're good at, it's not being successful. It looks like it was around 1931. Yeah, it was 1929, and with the help of Grodin, he obtained their support of the Society of Materialist Biologists, which was a heavily Marxist. Materialism is a Marxist worldview, and this particular society was hard into Marxism. Okay, so in the course of the political shakeup going on in the Soviet scientific world, because people are dying, people are disappearing, scientists involved in primary research lose their positions, and this is before his main man gets the old axe. But in the spring of 1930, he came under political criticism at his veterinary institute, which is the same as his research institute. December 13th, 1930, he was arrested, and he was sentenced to 5 years of exile in Alma-Ata, where he worked for a Kazakh veterinary zoologist institute. And he died of a stroke on the 20th of March, 1932, likely due to the hardships of his exile. His obituary was written by a physiologist and psychologist, Ivan Pavlov. I'm sure you're familiar with Pavlov. The man's legacy. All of this happened, likely didn't achieve any good results, although impossible to really know with, communist Russia. This is done and over. Stalin wants no part of it. It's dead. It
Right.
stays dormant for a while. Then some stuff starts coming out, some weird talk. It starts saying, well, the old communists didn't really accomplish anything. We heard talked about, and this is in the 80s, mind you. They start talking about in 1971 that another little communist regime may have said, having some chimp human soldiers or workers, maybe some slave labor, sounds like a pretty good idea. I'll give you a guess. What do you think that communist regime that said that is?
Another communist regime. It wasn't Chairman Mao.
How'd you get that in one? How'd you figure that out?
Well, I mean, there's not a lot to pick from,
Yeah.
really.
Yeah, exactly. We have the People's Republic of China, blah, blah, blah. The Communist Party of China
No,
decides that.
the People's Republic.
Okay, gotcha. People's Republic of totally free and fair and great victory, super fairness. Americans are dogs, China.
Yeah, Red Revolution in the streets.
Yeah, exactly. They decide, apparently, due to reports, that they're going to pick up this research. Now, the interesting thing that happens over the next couple of decades is you start to get Spanish, Italian, European, all of these various countries in Europe, their scientists are going to China to do genetic research. What ends up coming out of China, if you recall, was their story of successfully cloning pigs with human organs.
Yeah, that's right.
So they're cloning the organs, and they're supposedly for a human, an organ donation and things like that. The process continues on, and God only knows where it is to this day. You're not getting anything out of China without a bullet in the head. So apparently, they took Ivanov's research, according to the reports in the 80s, that are saying in 1971, they took his research and hit the ground running with it.
Wow.
And then shortly thereafter, they start modifying things like pigs to grow human organs. And that was actually presented to the world that they were successful. There have been other things involving Dolly the sheep. I believe that was Scotland, Dolly the sheep. I'm
Yeah.
not entirely sure, but that was successful. But all of these people, you had to do so very carefully because there was these international laws around cloning, around genetic experimentation that existed. And these days, it's not a subject that's real easy to touch. There's tons of problems if you want to go down that road. China, however, is pulling in scientists at an alarming rate, and they're doing a lot of work. I wonder where they're getting all the material. They must have like some camps.
Yeah, it seems
Uh,
like they would have to have a camp of some sort.
yeah, some sort of place where people are put and that they can volunteer.
Yeah, but that's
Maybe they
just speculation, right?
well maybe they serve cake. Maybe it's a it's like when you give plasma in the U.S. Like, hey, you want $20? So apparently that's something that, at least according to rumors, is going on today. Although I wouldn't really hold your breath for any kind of investigative journalism in that aspect, because it would take an awful lot of guts to find out something like that. But Mr. Ivanovov, like most of the Soviet scientists, was used when he didn't produce immediate results, and when the regime changed, he was thrown away. And due to his harsh conditions, that was likely why he suffered a stroke at the age of 61.
Hmm.
However, don't feel bad for him because his legacy lives on.
Damn.
And to this day, I'm going to pull up a quote here. A famous author who's done a couple stories in Scientific American, given a quote when she talked about Ivanov. Politicians could change political system, nationalize industries, turn farms into vast collectives, but the task of transforming people was entrusted to scientists. The aim was to match people to the socialist design of a Soviet society: pliable, strong enough to keep working, don't require much, and don't complain. This is a quote from Stephanie Payne. She's a biological journalist. She wrote for Scientific American, like I said, and some other sources. Now, in China, there were hiccups. A lot of times, the scientists, at least in one case, from what is understood, the scientists who were working on the project were repurposed for farming duty,
Wow.
and the chimpanzees died. But apparently, they're back on track, and they've officially said they want to use animals to create organs for human life-saving transplant.
Yeah, that's the
And
good. That's the news
yeah,
front man part of it. Oh, it's to help humans.
yeah. Now, the team had recently revealed that they had injected human stem cells capable of creating any type of tissue into a monkey embryo. They do, however, assure us, for the good of the world, the experiment was stopped before the embryo was old enough to be born.
Well,
So,
really.
thank you to them for taking the very responsible step, keeping something from that happening. I would like to extend my sincere gratitude to the CCP. And that is the story of Ivanov. Um,
Wow. Yeah, because I mean, I didn't know that it expanded out to China.
oh yeah,
Because
oh yeah, they picked it right up. Picked it right up.
the old stories I've always heard was that they tried to fertilize the human female embryos
Hmm.
or eggs, and
Yep.
it didn't work. And then no, they first tried to do human male semen on
The
chimpanzee
female apes.
embryos,
Yes,
and
that
that
is
didn't
correct.
work. And then
Correct.
they swapped it, and then they alluded to it working, and they're like, "Oh no!" After that, the project just went dark. That's where it ended. End of story. I
Well, and
never
see
heard
that
it went off. That was kind of successful and moved over to China.
it was successful in a sense that they were able to even the original experiments where you had the human semen and the chimpanzee embryo. The semen was actually capable of breaking into the embryo and fertilizing it. However, it didn't get much beyond that point, according to them. The
Yeah.
one thing I wanted to avoid here is when I was looking at this, there's a lot of speculation, but not much documentation. I mean, we're talking about the Soviet Union, and I didn't want to get too fantastical with this. Like, there you can find everything from it was an absolute failure from the get go, and it failed right on the table when they were trying the procedure, which, from what I'm seeing, even from their own accounts, is false, or that this is something that went crazy far and spawned Bigfoot, and now he flies a spaceship over over Washington State and abducts people. Like there's that whole gamut of crap, and I didn't
Wow.
want to. Yeah, I didn't want to get into any of that garbage. The only thing that had some validity after this project is gone, like obviously this project was ended regardless of its success by Stalin, and nothing likely ever came of it because you know how Stalin works. I know how Stalin works. He's a scorched earth kind of dictator, and he killed or exiled everybody. And I'm sure in standard Soviet fashion, anything that was useful in that project was just either locked away in an archive or absolutely destroyed
Yeah.
because they're a hammer where a scalpel is necessary.
And I
It's
imagine
ridiculous.
there's a lot of disinformation around it as well, because you
Well,
have
true.
one side trying to build it up and say, as you can see, our Russian scientists are so great and we're so far ahead, be afraid.
Yeah.
And then there'd
Yeah.
be another side that's like, no, 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 don't let them know what we're doing. Keep it quiet. Just say it didn't work so they don't try it, right?
Well, it's not even just that, but it's two factions within the same system. So not only would you have people arguing one and people arguing the other, those inside of Russia saying our scientists are so great, but you also have a faction inside of Russia saying these scientists were so not great, and that's why they were exiled. So even internally in the Soviet Union, there's no agreement on what actually happened. It's
Wow.
an absolute clusterfuck, as everything was in the Soviet Union back then. The Soviet Union was basically at war with everybody and themselves from the moment of its inception at the Bolshevik Revolution all the way until it mostly fell.
Yeah, even modern day China, there's still internal power struggles inside the party.
Oh, consistently, constantly. It's a hallmark of any kind of communist system. Important to note is that any research progress has been made on this reportedly, starting from the 1971 reports all the way up into the researchers who've successfully cloned or had the pigs with the human organs. It's always done by foreign scientists because no one in these communist countries ever seems to be capable of making these breakthroughs themselves, with the
Hmm.
exception of Ivanov. It's always outside help because, well, I mean, you can get to the fundamental principles of why there's no motivation to achieve in a communist society whatsoever, and that's why they never invent anything. Their finest car was a piece of junk. I mean,
It's an icon of junk.
yeah, it is an icon, and I must admit, from the outside, it does look good. The old what was the model the KGB used to drive around in? It's a beautiful car.
Oh, I don't remember the specific model the KGB is, but the people's car was the Lada, but then the KGB did have their own like custom
Yeah, it was like the
luxury.
Cadillac of cars over there.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I guess they were trying to mimic Cadillac, but it was
yeah.
also a raging piece of junk.
Oh, absolute trash, trash, and just like the T-34 tank, garbage. And it's garbage because no one has any motivation to make it not garbage. Their nuclear power plants, garbage. Well, I mean, we have the famous example.
No, what? No.
Yeah,
No.
and the solution to all of their problems has always been toss bodies at it.
Yeah,
So
just throw people at it. They'll figure it out eventually.
you are a Chinese or a Soviet scientist. Are you going to walk into this situation? I'm going to try my hardest and get recognized. Dude, the best thing you can do in those societies is not have anybody notice you.
Yeah,
But
don't let people know your name. Keep your head down, blend in with the crowd, and just ride it.
yeah, if you're smart enough to do this kind of research, you're smart enough to pick up on that. So that's essentially the story of the Humanzee. Um,
So there's no
uh,
ape army then. So there's no ape army roaming the woods of Siberia.
No ape army roaming the woods of
Nah,
Siberia.
I'm
No abduction of people. Yeah, I'm sorry to disappoint there.
see. I thought that the Russians were going to make an ape army. They were going to steal old Nazi UFO technology, have them
Mhm.
fly around the world, populating the North Pacific of the United States with Sasquatches that will one day come out of the woods and conquer America. That didn't happen.
Well, I mean,
That's a
for
subject for
that,
another time.
yeah, if you want to look into that, you might want to look up Yuri Bezmenov. But
Yeah.
just a good point to end on the 1971 reports of, well, basically the reports in the 80s of the research done in 71 did definitively say that they did create the first monkey human hybrid in a lab in China.
Wow.
It doesn't elaborate further than that, but it was all the talk back then, and it wasn't exactly coming from the most unreliable of places.
Hmm.
So,
Well,
yay, China!
that's been debunked. Actually, it's not
It's been
true.
debunked.
No, it's been.
And you know, as a side note, I've said this before. I take great issue with the approach that Scientific American took towards the article. I looked at it dismissed it outright while not maintaining any kind of open mind. Not only that, but they dismissed the motivation of communist government for just about everything they undertake. It's almost like they were writing an article explaining a subject that happened in a different country. I wouldn't even believe the explanation of that if you were talking about some kind of experimentation on humans and apes in the United States. I wouldn't even believe that about our own government, let alone a communist one. The bottom line is, if you have infertility problems or you have problems with inseminating domestic animals, trying to make something more robust, the first guy on the scene, any kind of standing within the government or even the military hears about this, first thought, weapon. First thought. It's the first thought anybody has because they're human being. And whenever you read these articles by Scientific American, they always take a very non-human approach to examining. And I know they're looking for evidence. I know there's not much of it because of the absolute political cluster that this whole situation was, especially with his main supporter being who he was.
Right.
But the entire article reads as disingenuous, almost, I'm not going to say cover, but it seems like just a blatant dismissal by someone who thinks they know more than you, but probably couldn't tie their shoes, by themselves.
Right.
So, I mean, there's that. Yeah, information was scarce on this one, though. I did want to do it because it's fascinating. But yeah, this whole thing. I mean, basically, what we're looking at is the future, not apes and humans, but genetic manipulation. And China's going to be at the forefront of that. Can't help but wonder if maybe Ivanov was basically the bedrock for that.
That's pretty good. Next episode of Bell Midnight, we're going to be talking about how to astrally project as a spider and communicate with ancient spider deities.
I think I'm sick that day. Can you use the healing power of crystals to ward off that particular astral projection?
I don't know.